The last sound I heard before my grandmother closed her eyes forever was the buzz of my phone. Not a monitor flatlining, not a prayer. A text notification. And the message on that screen, 4 short lines from my own father, told me everything I had spent 36 years trying not to believe about the family I was born into. She heard it. That little chime in the silence of the ICU. She heard it, and she looked at me, and she already knew. I want you to stay with me through this story, because what happened next, what she did in the hours she had left, changed the rest of my life. And I think it might change something in you, too. My name is Celeste. I'm 36 years old, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the same neighborhood where I grew up, except now I live in my grandmother Nana Ruth's house, surrounded by her African violets and her good china, and the particular smell of cedar and magnolia that I used to associate with safety. I moved in 3 months ago. I moved in because she left it to me. And she left it to me because, in the end, she knew exactly who had actually shown up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the night it started. It was a Thursday in early October when my phone rang just after 9 in the evening. I was still in my work clothes, eating leftover rice at my kitchen counter, when I saw the number Atlanta Medical Center. My stomach dropped before the woman on the other end even said a word. Nana Ruth had collapsed at home. A neighbor had found her on the kitchen floor. She had been rushed into emergency surgery, and I needed to come now. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I remember parking. I remember the automatic doors opening with a blast of cold air. I remember a nurse with kind eyes guiding me to a waiting room that smelled of hand sanitizer and grief. And I remember the surgeon's face when he finally came out, that particular expression doctors develop when they have learned to deliver the worst news without breaking apart themselves. Controlled, careful, honest. He told me her condition was critical. The surgery had stabilized her for now, but the damage was severe. She had hours, not days. If there was anyone who needed to say goodbye, I needed to make those calls immediately. I sat down on a plastic chair and I made myself breathe. Then, I picked up my phone. My father, Raymond, has never been a man who answers calls he doesn't feel like taking. I've known this since I was 7 years old, and called him from a school payphone after I missed the bus in a rainstorm, and he let it ring. So I wasn't surprised when my call went to voicemail. I left a message brief, composed, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. Then I sent a text to both him and my mother, Diane. I kept it simple. Nana Ruth is critical. Hospital, please come now. Then I walked back down the corridor to her room. She was so small in that bed. Nana Ruth had always seemed larger than life to me. A woman with a laugh that could fill a church hall, with hands that knew how to make biscuits and French braids, and how to hold a crying child all at the same time. But lying there beneath the fluorescent lights, connected to monitors that beeped with mechanical indifference, she looked fragile in a way that made my chest cave in. I sat beside her and I took her hand, papery, warm, still familiar, and I held on. A few minutes passed. My phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting to see my mother's name. But it was Raymond. I tapped the notification and read his reply once. Then again. Then a third time, because surely I had misread something. He had written, "You're already there. She's in good hands with you. We'll make the drive if she actually passes." That was it? No, how is she? No, we're on our way. No, give her our love. Just a clean, efficient calculation. Why spend the effort now when we can confirm the situation is worth it later? I sat very still. I want to tell you I didn't cry. But I did. Quietly. With my hand still holding Nana Ruth's and my phone face down in my lap. Because I didn't want her to see the screen. I swallowed everything down and I breathed until I could breathe normally again. I failed. Because Nana Ruth's eyes opened. She looked around the room first, a slow, careful survey. The way someone does when they already suspect the answer, but are giving hope one last chance. She looked at the empty chair by the window. She looked at the closed door. Then she looked at me. And her gaze was completely clear, no confusion, no medication fog, just the sharp, quiet intelligence she had carried her entire 81 years. "Is Raymond coming, baby?" she asked. Her voice was barely a thread. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. The way she said it, not hopeful, really. more like a woman who has been keeping a long and private account, and has just turned to the last page. She already knew. She was giving me the dignity of telling her myself rather than pretending. I couldn't lie to her. Not there. Not then. I told her what he'd written. Every word. She didn't gasp. She didn't weep. A small, tired smile moved across her lips, and she nodded once, slowly, like someone receiving confirmation of something they had quietly suspected for a very long time. "I thought so," she whispered. Then, "Good. I need you to do something for me." She told me to get my phone. She told me to prop it against the water pitcher on the bedside table, angled at her face. She told me to press record and then to sit with her and not say anything until she was finished. My hands were shaking when I set it up. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I pressed the red circle and I sat back and I watched my grandmother gather every ounce of strength left in her body. She smoothed the blanket across her lap. She lifted her chin. She looked directly into that little lens as if she could see straight through it, to every person who would one day watch from the other side. And then she spoke. I will not paraphrase what she said. I will tell you this. She was precise. She was composed. She was utterly, devastatingly clear. She talked about Raymond and Diane, about years of borrowed money, never returned, about the time she had needed surgery herself and they had not visited, about the way they spoke to her in private versus the warmth they performed in public. She held up Raymond's text on her own phone, the one I had forwarded to her, and she read it aloud in a voice that did not waver. Then she talked about me. I wasn't prepared for that part. I thought I was ready. But when she looked into the camera and started describing in specific, luminous detail every moment she had watched me show up for her over the years, I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. She talked about the Tuesday nights I drove across town to sit with her after her hip surgery. She talked about the grocery lists and the doctor's appointments and the Christmas when my parents went to Cancun and she and I ate tamales on her living room floor and watched old movies until midnight. She said I had never once made her feel like a burden. She stopped recording a little after midnight. She passed away just before 4 a.m, with my hand in hers and no one else in the room. Honestly, I don't know how to explain what those hours were like. Grief is strange when it arrives alongside relief. Relief that she wasn't alone. Relief that she hadn't suffered longer. And underneath all of it, a guilt about feeling relieved at all. I sat with her for a long time after. I called the nurse. I called Nana Ruth's attorney, who had already received sealed instructions from her weeks prior. Before the collapse instructions, she had apparently prepared with quiet precision during a routine visit, as if she had known something was shifting. I did not call Raymond or Diane until morning. 7 days later, I sat in the front pew of Greater Zion Baptist Church in southwest Atlanta, the same pew where Nana Ruth had sat every Sunday for 40 years, surrounded by the people who had genuinely loved her. Her friends from the choir, the women from her garden club, the neighbors who brought her sweet potato pie and stayed to talk. The church was full. She had been loved, and the love was real. And you could feel the difference between that and what was coming down the center aisle behind me. I heard the doors open. I didn't turn around. I heard the particular sound of performance, a sigh just loud enough, a whispered exchange with a cousin intended to be overheard, the rustle of expensive fabric. Raymond and Diane made their entrance in coordinated charcoal gray. Diane clutching a handkerchief she pressed to her eyes at precise intervals. Raymond walking with the heavy, deliberate step of a man broadcasting devastation. They accepted embraces from people they hadn't seen in years. They whispered about how unexpected it had been, how terrible to lose her so suddenly, how they had rushed here the moment they could. My jaw tightened. I stared straight ahead at the casket. If you have ever sat in a room and watched someone perform a grief they did not feel, you know the particular nausea that brings. It is not just the dishonesty. It is the theft they were taking up space that belonged to people who were genuinely devastated, absorbing comfort meant for the bereaved. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and I reminded myself, wait. At the intermission, Raymond found me in the side hallway. He had dropped the performance the instant we were alone. His voice shifted from soft and mournful to clipped and businesslike, the way a man's voice does when he stops needing an audience. He said they needed to discuss the estate. He said he assumed, as direct next of kin, that the house and the main accounts would transfer to him and Diane. He said he needed access to the paperwork before the formal reading. He stood there in his expensive suit expecting me to hand him the keys to his mother's life. I looked at him for a long moment. I said nothing. The chapel bells began to ring, calling people back to their seats. I turned and walked away, and he had no choice but to follow, because the scene in the hallway was not the kind of attention he wanted right now. The service resumed. The pastor stood at the pulpit. He was not holding his Bible. He was holding a sealed envelope with the gold stamp of a law office in the corner, and he looked at our row with an expression I can only describe as braced. He explained that the envelope had been delivered by Nana Ruth's attorney with explicit instructions it was to be read aloud to the assembled congregation before she was laid to rest, per her wishes. Legally documented. The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when everyone suddenly understands something significant is happening. The pastor broke the seal. He read. She had written a letter. It was addressed to everyone present, and it began with warmth, thanking the community, naming specific people she loved, expressing her faith. Then the tone changed. The pastor's voice remained steady as he read her words, but I watched his knuckles tighten on the paper. She had written, "If my son Raymond is in this room today, I ask the congregation not to allow his grief to go unexamined." A sound moved through the pews. Not quite a gasp. More like the sharp collective intake of an audience that has just realized the play is not what they thought it was. Raymond went rigid. Diane looked left and right, calculating. The pastor continued. Nana Ruth's letter explained that she had spent her final weeks organizing her affairs, not out of bitterness, but out of love for the truth. She wrote that she had recorded a final message, and she asked that it be played now, on the screens behind the pulpit, for everyone gathered. I reached into my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady, steadier than they had ever been. I connected my phone to the church's display system, found the file, and tapped play. Her face appeared on both screens. The room held its breath. She looked exactly as she had that night, frail, clear-eyed, undefeated. She said hello to the congregation. She said she hoped they would forgive her for making her farewell complicated, but that she had learned late in life that the truth delayed is damage prolonged. Then she told them about the text message. She held up a printed screenshot, Raymond's words, exactly as he had written them, visible to the entire room. She read them aloud in her own voice, calmly, without editorial. She didn't need to add anything. The words were sufficient. She spoke for 11 minutes. I know because I've watched the recording many times since. In those 11 minutes, she described the decades of financial manipulation, the borrowing that was never borrowing, the performances of devotion that appeared only when inheritance was on the table, the private coldness behind the public warmth. She spoke with specificity, and without cruelty, which made it far more devastating than anger would have been. She was not punishing. She was correcting the record. Raymond's hands were white on the armrest. I want to be honest with you, I had rehearsed staying calm through this moment. I had told myself I would feel nothing, that I was beyond it, but watching my grandmother's face on that screen, watching her use the last of her strength to tell the truth, I felt something crack open in me that I hadn't realized had been sealed shut. I cried, not from grief exactly. From something more complicated, the relief of finally being seen. Of having the private reality confirmed in a room full of witnesses. She is not wrong, I thought. She was never wrong. We both knew the truth for years, and now everyone else does too. On screen, Nana Ruth's expression shifted slightly. She straightened. She reached for a document beside her on the hospital blanket. She explained that she had spent her final weeks working with her attorney to restructure her estate completely. She looked at the camera and spoke the words clearly. To her granddaughter Celeste, who had shown up when no one else would, she left her home, her savings, her personal property, and her complete legacy. A warm murmur moved through the congregation. Then she paused, and she said, "To my son Raymond and his wife Diane, I leave my commercial property on the south side of the city." Raymond's expression broke open with something that looked, briefly, like relief. Like he had salvaged something from the wreckage. Nana Ruth let the silence hold for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "What they do not know is that this property carries a mortgage at its maximum limit, over $280,000 in delinquent tax obligations, and is currently under city code enforcement orders for structural violations. I leave them the full legal and financial responsibility of this property. They have always believed that family is about what you receive. Now they will learn what it means to inherit the consequences of neglect. The screen went dark. The chapel was silent for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then the murmuring began low, building, spreading pew to pew like a current. Heads turned. Eyes moved to Raymond and Diane, not with sympathy, with something colder and more clarifying. Raymond stood up. His face had moved past shock into something pale and controlled and furious, the face of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone he had long since stopped taking seriously. He grabbed Diane's arm. They walked, not ran, because even now he needed to manage the optics. They walked quickly down the center aisle and out through the back doors, into the October afternoon, while the congregation watched in silence. The service continued without them. What Nana Ruth understood, and what I have been thinking about every day since, is that exposure without evidence is just noise. She knew that. She had lived long enough to see how easily the charming and the manipulative could reshape a story in their favor, how quickly public sympathy flows toward the most convincing performance. So she prepared. She documented. She enlisted a pastor, an attorney, a room full of witnesses, and a recording that could not be interrupted or reframed. She did not wait for someone else to tell the truth on her behalf. She told it herself, in her own voice, with her own hands, from a hospital bed at midnight. That is the lesson I carry now. Not just document everything, though yes, document everything, but something deeper. You do not have to wait until you are gone to stop allowing a false version of your life to be the official version. The truth is not self-executing. Someone has to be willing to speak it, clearly, with receipts, in a room where it cannot be ignored. If you have ever been the one who showed up at the hospital, at the move, at the hard conversation while someone else was conveniently unavailable, and then watched that person position themselves as equally devoted when something was on the line, you already know what this story is about. You know the specific exhaustion of that. You know the way it makes you question your own perception. Because surely no one could be that calculated. Surely you are being uncharitable. Nana Ruth taught me. Trust what you have witnessed. Trust the pattern over the performance. 3 months later, Raymond and Diane have been forced to sell 2 personal assets to cover the tax obligations on the commercial property. I have heard through family that they are contesting the estate, that their attorney sent a letter questioning the validity of the recorded will. I was advised by my own attorney that the documentation is airtight. The recording, the witnesses, the written letter, the sealed envelope delivered prior to the medical emergency, Nana Ruth planned it so carefully that there is nothing to contest. I wake up in her house every morning. I make coffee in her kitchen. I sit at her table. Sometimes I talk to her, because I'm not sure the habit of telling her things is one I'm ready to break. I tell her that the African violets are doing fine, though I nearly killed the one by the window until someone told me I was overwatering. I tell her that I'm learning. I tell her she did a good thing. I believe she hears me. Before I go, I want to ask you something. I want you to sit with this question honestly, not the comfortable answer but the real one. If you received that text message from a parent during a family crisis, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Would you have confronted them privately? Or would you have done what Nana Ruth did, waited, prepared, and let the truth speak for itself in a room where there was no escape from it? Drop a 1 in the comments if you would have handled it the same way she did. Drop a 2 if you would have confronted them face to face before the funeral. Drop a 3 if you honestly don't know, because sometimes the right answer isn't clear until you're actually in it. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what time it is there. This story began in a small ICU room in Atlanta at 4 in the morning, and I want to know how far Nana Ruth's voice has reached. And if you have ever been the person in that hospital room, the one who stayed, I see you. What you gave mattered, even when no one said so, especially then. If this story stayed with you, please consider subscribing. I share stories about family, accountability, and the hard and necessary work of loving people the right way. I'd be glad to have you here. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, living or deceased, or to actual events, is entirely coincidental.